This podcast is brought to you by long-term sponsor CDKeyOffer.com. Use offer code BrokenSilicon for 25% off all Microsoft software and Die Shrink for 3% off everything else on the website. And it is also brought to you by Bliss, and there's a link in the description to check out that sponsor as well, and we'll say more later. But for now, let's just get on with the show. Welcome to Broken Silicon, a gaming hardware podcast. I am your host, Tom. Today, as I am on every news episode, joined by my co-host,
Dan.
I feel like the "and" in your name gets a little longer every time we record an episode.
Perhaps it does.
Perhaps, and even, well, it's not really mayhaps for a couple of months, but how are you doing?
I'm pretty good, and I would say it's mayhaps in about a month, Tom.
That's about, it begins being mayhaps in a month. Right now, it's March apps, and then it'll be April apps.
Yeah.
As opposed to half-off apps, which is something I got in college.
Yeah, Dan, that's how everybody says things, Tom.
Mm-hmm. There's nothing at all weird or, I don't know, a complete waste of time in anything being said right now. But,
nope.
I don't know. I think we got a pretty normal episode here today. This weekend, I've been working pretty hard looking over a bit of RDNA information in addition to just little things about upcoming Nvidia products and a boatload of research into Zen 5, which I guess I said this on the last Die Shrink too, which of course, let me throw out there. There's a video version of it. It's only for patrons. It's like a bonus Broken Silicon that really gets into a lot of interesting subjects for those who support us on Patreon. But like I said in that episode, I'm aware there are constant random Zen 5 rumors swirling around about a dozen different types of core counts, IPC estimates, release dates, and whatever. But, I feel like I've said enough a couple of years ago about what you can expect. Like, it's better than Zen 4, it's a complete architecture redesign. And outside of that, I just don't see the need to clearly just guess 100 times a month or try to be the first one to say something and then have to correct it. So it's coming, but I just want it to be accurate, because this one has been a bit weird with TSMC's 3nm issues. And I have had sources kind of saying things here and there, and it's just now finally, for me at least, coming together. And I just hope the amount of leaks we put out would tell you it's fine if we're not the first to say everything, but once we're done, we're done.
And I can bravely say, Tom, it will be somewhere between 16 and 32 cores.
For desktop?
Yeah.
Yes, I think, that's something you could have safely said
4 years ago.
4 years ago. So yeah, and I will, confirm something that I've leaked before. It has higher IPC than Zen 4.
Ooh, getting into the big scoops today.
Anyways, let us start getting into some of these opening reader mails. Brett Summers writes in, he says, "Hi, Tom and Danny. What internet speeds and what connection type do you guys have? Fiber, cable, DSL, gigabyte? Random question, I know, but I'm curious." I use Google Fiber at 1 gigabit a second.
I've got 1 gigabit Xfinity, and that's advertised as 1 gigabit. It's usually closer to 500, but
really,
good enough. Yeah, I could call them, but whenever you call an internet provider, I feel like your internet gets better for 2 days, and then it just goes back down to whatever it was before. So I'm not complaining at 500 anyways.
Yeah, I've done that before when I lived in Detroit, actually, and that is what happened. And I believe, I think I had a guest on here a couple of years ago that was involved in internet who told me, that's a thing. They literally do that. We do that.
Wild.
My Google, you say usually, so I assume that means it's not like a router bottlenecking it, right? It is sometimes at it.
Yeah, it's sometimes at it. It's just not super reliable. I don't have fiber internet, I guess, so it's cable. So I don't know if it's just less reliable than what fiber is able to do or what. But
Right. And all I can say is Google Fiber is always at the speed they say it will be at. And if it's ever goes down, it's for a very limited time. And they even proratedly pay you a refund on the amount of hours it's down, which is almost never even an entire hour. So it's always actually a little funny to me when they're like, here's 5 cents or something in your internet bill. And, actually, it's funny, when I moved here almost exactly 2 years ago, like after I upgraded to fiber, I believe it was AT&T came by and said, well, we actually use the same cables, so you could switch to us. And I looked, and their price was like the same. And I said, yeah, but you guys lower people's internet after a month of having it. Why would I switch to you then? They're like, thank you for your time.
Okay, never mind.
That is literally how the conversation went. I just asked 2 basic questions, and they said, well, thank you for your time.
Cool.
All right, let's see here. Actually, let me skip this one. Resident Mexican writes in and says, on the topic of ChatGPT creating a script for a die shrink in Broken Silicon 196, I think it would be hilarious, actually, if you did use ChatGPT to create a leaked specs rumor for Nvidia Blackwell or AMD RDNA 4. I love to see what wacky specs the AI tries to create. I've actually thought about doing this. I was curious about a week ago, like, what if I wrote down what I know about something, and then I just see if ChatGPT can write a script based on, like, my YouTube channel's usual content. But I figured, no, I'm like 90% sure be a complete waste of my time. And in fact, I tried to use a couple of AI picture websites to make that Raptor Lake refresh thumbnail.
Yeah.
And no, like, no matter how I worded it, no matter what I said, I was like, give me Meteor Lake and Raptor Lake on a mountain with like lightning behind it with blue heat, like, color palettes. And all it gave me was the blue. It got correct, mostly blue colors, but it was some ridiculous Frankenstein version of what a CPU could look like with random numbers all over it. And I found it, no matter how much I simplified it, it couldn't just use like a Raptor Lake i9 chip and add to it. It just looked like a melted CPU with a blue background and random numbers and characters and like weird calligraphy all over it. So I said, I think this channel is too niche. If it can't even do something like that, I'm not going to bother with the script yet. I realize those are different companies, though.
I did just check into ChatGPT to see what it said, and one of the fun things about ChatGPT is it operates within boundaries unless you like give it weird prompts. So to ask it to make a rumor about Blackwell, you have to say, as a joke, can you tell me about rumored specs for Blackwell? And it says 40,000 CUDA cores and 256 gigabytes of GDDR6.
All right, so yeah, that's pretty good.
That's pretty bold, ChatGPT.
But let me see, 40,000. Yeah, it's funny though. It's not like it said 1 million. That is 3 times what's in Lovelace. So it's not. I don't think that's really plausible, but it's like not completely insane.
It's within the ballpark of possible.
Yeah, so I'm impressed, and I just wish, to my knowledge, ChatGPT doesn't do pictures, though, right?
No, it only does text.
Right. I wish it did pictures, because that would make making thumbnails possibly much easier for me. And I'm telling you, the competition is not up to the task when it comes to this type of stuff for that. All right, let me move on here to corrections, which the one that I wanted to get to most is one no one submitted. So it's a self-correction on a response I made to QH Freddy regarding Robert Hallock leaving AMD and affecting marketing. A source of mine actually reached out after listening to the episode and said, remember, he worked on CPU marketing, so it's unlikely he ever would have touched RDNA 3. And the funny thing is, I realized my answer was, I phrased it this way intentionally. I would say AMD's marketing has gotten worse since September of last year for graphics, but I don't think it's really because of Robert. Even
Okay.
more so because he didn't even do that.
Yeah, because
which I still think is a correction on what I said.
Yes.
But yeah, I just wanted to get to that. And otherwise, I think it is time to get to story number 1. Early FSR 3 info announced at GTC. It's still going to be open sourced. Quoting from Tech Power Up, last week AMD announced new details regarding Fidelity FX Super Resolution 3.0. The engineering team is aiming for a doubling of frame performance improvements over the existing FSR 2.0 technology, which it claims is already capable of, in quotes here, computing more pixels than we have samples in the current frame. This will be achieved by generating a greater number of pixels in a current frame via the addition of interpolated frames, like what DLSS 3 does. It is highly likely that the team will reach a point in development where one sample at least will be created for every interpolated pixel. The team wants to prevent feedback loops from occurring as well. An interpolated frame should only be shown once, and any interpolation artifact should only remain for one frame is their goal. However, a number of potential setbacks were noted by AMD in what they're trying to achieve. It relies on color clamping to correct the color of outdated samples, and that's not entirely feasible. And it will be difficult to produce nonlinear motion interpolation on 2D screen space, motion vectors. The interpolation of final frames will mean that all post-processing needs to be interpolating, also counting the user interface in the foreground. One of AMD's diagrams shows how a native rendering technique stacks up to FSR 2 and FSR 3.0. FSR 3.0 will enable a smoother overall gaming experience, and simultaneously, this allows developers to focus more GPU time on visual quality. Latency reduction is a key focus as well. AMD stressed that they want to be the best at latency reduction, and they have the gamer in mind. High frame rates and the lowest achievable latency, a basic requirement of anything. The engineers are also aiming for a smooth upgrade path from titles that currently utilize 2.0. They want them all to get updates to support 3.0. So I don't know. This was information that I was aware of when they were going to go over this at GDC. I had contacts at GDC who saw it and kind of told me early stuff about it, and was hoping AMD would put out stuff the day they gave the presentation, but they didn't.
Mm-hmm.
And so instead of, because what we were initially planning is maybe doing a die shrink on it, instead of discussing it last week, we will discuss it this week. What did you think of the information that's finally come out?
I mean, so there's we're 6 months now removed almost from, or probably closer to 5 months removed from the unveiling of RDNA 3, and there's still no actual sign of FSR 3.0.
Yeah. No dates whatever given here.
Yeah, like, so I mean, I don't know what you think is an optimistic timeline, but like this sounds like it could still be 6 months or more out. I would like to see it come out more than halfway through this graphics cards generation, but that seems to be about where we're at. And other than that, I don't know, hearing that they're aiming to double frame rates with FSR 3.0 and adding interpolation, that kind of sounds like the upscaling isn't going to do that much this time around, and it's going to be mostly interpolation, which I'm, just like with Nvidia, hesitant about.
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't know. I wouldn't read too much into that. I would just say we don't know how much of FSR 3 will have non-interpolation upgrades to picture quality, right? Yeah. I think this is mostly talking about the interpolation part. So I wouldn't make bets either way on that. I'd also throw out the caveat that at least what I saw in Harry Potter, I thought FSR 2 looked pretty dang good compared to early FSR 1 I've tested. Remember, I almost never use FSR guides because I have DLSS, and most of the games I play have DLSS support. But it seems like it's definitely been improved a lot. I tested on Deep Rock Galactic as well with the latest patch, and I mean, we thought FSR was kind of a joke of that game since then. So I don't know. I still think DLSS is ahead, but I keep wanting to remind people that AMD is becoming much, much closer, even at lower resolutions, using it than a year ago.
Yeah.
And I guess I'd also say that my memory in 2021 about FSR 1.0 is that I want to say it kind of came out of nowhere, but it seemed like no. People I talk to say no. My sources say no. And then all of a sudden, it's coming in a couple months or something in April or May. You remember that?
Yeah. I mean, we're just not at that point yet. So I would expect that it's at least still 3 months away. But we'll see.
But that's not halfway through the generation. So that's all I would say. I don't see any evidence it's ready for this summer. But I also have to remember FSR 1 just kind of appeared.
That's true.
If I remember right, we were talking about FSR in early 2021, like January, February, March, and being like, I don't know, maybe not till late this year because they just won't talk about it. And then it was like April or May, all of a sudden, me and a couple other channels just started talking about it. And it was like, oh, all right, So I don't know. I guess I'll also say, from what I've heard, maybe late summer is what I've been told, but that's like a month old information. So I wouldn't rule out it coming this summer, but I would say that, yeah, it doesn't seem ready next month.
Yeah. And I think that's just a problem AMD has in general with their feature set. A lot of the time, they're a little bit, they're behind in their technology and in their releases of their features a lot of the time versus Nvidia. And, they're still playing catch up to them. Yeah. Hopefully
that feature set. Yeah.
Yeah. Hopefully that they eventually do just catch up with them and reach parity with Nvidia, but not yet.
Yeah. I mean, I've been talking about this with Brian Heemskirk behind the scenes, who's a guest who comes on Broken Silicon all the time about its features. And I've talked to a couple other developers, actually a developer that might come on Broken Silicon very soon, who works on Unreal Engine stuff. And it was interesting. I was kind of like breaking down the wording and looking at the article with him together as we were like planning on, what will we talk about if he comes on Broken Silicon. And it's funny how he kind of suggested the same thing I did. Like, really the holy grail for latency reduction would be if AMD could have just a better system of predicting when an artifact's going to appear. And if not, skipping the frame, canceling it a third into rendering or interpolating to get that latency reduction down. Because again, we're never going to get 120 hertz turning into 240 hertz feeling like 240 hertz latency wise. But like, what if you could take 120 hertz and it could feel like 130 hertz but look like 240 with minimal artifacts? They could get that working. That would be crazy, though. That would be a big deal. And I hope that's what I think they kind of have to achieve, though, to make a splash, in addition to being open source, which it is open source. And I think that's a big deal, because what this means is, this Unreal person I talked to said this as well. Like, if they could get something that we can't compete with and works on everything, then, but what if it became an input for Unreal Engine 5 or 6, and then we're not going to bother with DLSS support in any games if that's just built in, And if they could get that into engines, that'd be huge. I think that's what Brian Heemskirk said as well. So I don't know. That's really all I have to say is, look, it's not coming next month. They're saying they want to be better than the competition. That's what they would say either way, though. And it kind of sounds like they're focusing on the right things. And most of the technical talk is frankly above my head. But the people I've sent it to say the devs I've sent it to says, oh, they're taking an interesting approach here that might be fascinating if they pull off like what they seem to be trying to pull off if they actually do. So it looks like something to look forward to, though. I hope I'm not wrong about this, obviously. I don't think we're just going to get what DLSS 3 is now worse in half a year. I don't think so. Well, but and AMD will have to prove that wrong, though. Well, because, until we see it, that's what it is,
Yeah, I mean, obviously, that's just what my worry about FSR will be. Honestly, I'm just hoping that when you're doing interpolation, there's just going to be latency added. Hopefully the latency penalty isn't too extreme, though,
Brink of Destruction writes in and says, if FSR is implemented in some way, either in the next generation of consoles or sometime this gen, and some version of DLSS is used with the Nintendo Switch 2, which do you see as coming out on top? So I actually thought about this question, and the notes I put down were, listen to my conversation with Brian Heemskirk on a recent Broken Silicon, because we really get into this. And overall, if AMD can just launch an FSR 3 that fully competes with DLSS 3, is open source, which now we know it will be, with inputs for all vendors to add their customizations to take the best advantage of it, and then it gets native integration to a few major engines, like maybe the stuff Microsoft uses, PlayStation uses, and Unreal Engine 5, I think that's enough to make AMD win. I would argue that in that scenario, where it's the default in a bunch of popular game engines and open source, with AMD openly inviting Nvidia to help contribute to it for their graphics cards, I think it's just going to be a situation where it's kind of like FreeSync almost. FreeSync is like in all monitors now. You don't see, at least I haven't noticed, G-Sync only monitors really anymore. And it seems like half of monitors support G-Sync, and then it became most because it basically became FreeSync. And I would suggest that in this scenario I just outlined, if it's the default in a bunch of engines, open source, what we'll see is FSR 3.0 support in every game, and then DLSS is still in a few NVIDIA-sponsored games. And I don't think the Switch really changes that. Like, remember, a lot of devs ignore the Switch with most of their games. They do. They just ignore it. And so even if the devs have to use DLSS for the games they put on Switch, and they might as well put that on desktop, that's not the same as saying like all games that go to PlayStation and PC have FSR support, because that's more games. That is more games. And I think that'd be a scenario where AMD still wins, but I don't think DLSS will ever go away anytime soon. And it'll probably be in less stuff compared to like G-Sync, but G-Sync also just became FreeSync. So I don't know. I don't know. I just that's basically what I think. And if AMD could accomplish this early next year, that'd probably be about winner before the Switch 2 launches, which I don't want to get into another leak. I'm going to have come out soon, but the Switch 2 stuff coming out of here soon. Go on. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, and I don't think it's necessarily a function of like, if these technologies get adopted in one of the consoles, what will make it dominant on desktop. Like, you see all the time still games are Nvidia sponsored games, or I think that's becoming a little bit of a thing of the past versus like the mid 2010s. But you see like all these Nvidia sponsored games, even though Radeon is the obviously dominant in the console space right now. Modern Radeon technology is, at least, because the Switch is on very outdated hardware. And you would still get a bunch of NVIDIA-sponsored games, and I think that's how NVIDIA can still get DLSS integrated into desktop, is if they say, hey, we'll integrate this into your pipeline for free or whatever, even if FSR is this open source thing that gets widely adopted.
Right, and let's remember, just like Switch 2 fundamentally using DLSS for everything, which I think I've said a while ago. It sounds like DLSS
makes
will be
sense.
a fundamental aspect of the Switch 2. Whatever, RDNA 2 in consoles didn't make DLSS die, so why would DLSS in the Switch make FSR die? Or I don't. It's a factor, but it's not the factor. Frobos writes in and says, do you think foveated rendering will come to desktop gaming anytime soon? I could see integrated cameras and ultra-wide monitors really benefiting from lower resolutions and peripheral vision. What about you? Think we will see something like that in the next couple of years? And so, just so people don't know, although probably most of our listeners know, foveated rendering is used in the PlayStation VR 2. It's actually a core part of it. And I leaked to you guys that everyone I talked to that had tried it works amazingly. And I actually saw a video from Linus Tech Tips with it, where Linus had it hooked up to a TV. And obviously, if you have it on, it's using your eye tracking with little cameras inside of there to render things outside of it directly what you're looking at in a lower resolution. But if you're also projecting that to a TV so your friends can see what you're doing, they can see the blurriness on the outskirts of the screen. And they started pointing out to Linus, who was wearing the headset, hey, it's blurrier here and here. And he said, I'm telling you, I can't see it. Like, anytime he flipped his eye, tried to do it quickly, like sees that flower in the corner of my vision blurry, he said, it looks sharp. Everything just looks sharp.
Oh,
so
that's really cool.
It is impressive. And it does seem to be allowing the PlayStation VR 2 with a PS5 that's like, performance around a 6700 or 6700 XT. It's allowing it to perform like a high-end VR system because of that. But it's hard for me to see how that, getting to the answer here, it's hard to me to see how that easily comes to monitors in the short term. It's definitely possible, but you need decent cameras, maybe a couple of them at the top of a monitor, looking at your eyes and hyper accurately rendering, right, things at lower resolutions in the outskirts. Although I gotta say that personally, this just seems like something AMD or Nvidia should push for as part of a premium G-Sync or FreeSync standard. And that the second that idea leaves my mouth, I'm like, oh shit, Nvidia's probably doing this with the next gen of G-Sync, where if you want G-Sync, whatever it's called, 3.0, like a sticker, you have to support foveated rendering. And if you do, yeah, the monitor costs an extra $100 or, you know, whatever they end up charging when it first comes out. But guess what? This 5K monitor now gives you 4K frame rates.
Yeah, I think it's going to happen at some point, but the problem for foveated rendering does seem inherently harder on a monitor than it does for a headset, just because with the headset, you know, your eye is a fixed length away from the monitor and the camera. So, like, if I'm doing this or something while playing a game,
true, your head's not
and
fixed.
I only have one camera, I don't think that's really feasible. With two, I think it would be feasible to track you.
Mm-hmm. And so it wouldn't be cheap.
Yeah, you would need two. You would need two. I think two would work, maybe three, but two definitely would be required for foveated rendering on a desktop.
And do we really want a scenario, though, where like Asus has their version, MSI has their version, Acer has their version, and then devs have to try to program for all of these monitor variants? I think this has to be like a part of a next generation of G-Sync.
Yeah, because like the easiest way to do it is if like you had a standard where like the cameras were built into the monitor or something, and like an industry standardized fixed ratio on the monitor or some weird thing like that. But
yeah,
it sounds difficult.
Yeah, and it sounds like something that if AMD wants an advantage, they will push for this standard now before Nvidia, or they can wait 2 years for Nvidia to announce Blackwell with foveated rendering support, and then they announce the AMD version's coming.
Foveated rendering is what AMD would call it.
I would hope
something.
They wouldn't call it that. But, you know, yeah, I think this is something that because of how Frankenstein PC gaming is with so many different vendors, components, that it's not something you can just throw together like Sony did in VR. And, you know, Sony put a lot of effort into it. So I think you're going to need these companies to come in and force monitors on a standard. And I think once they do it, though, it would be totally worth paying an extra $100 or so for a monitor, as long as you did not notice, to boost your frame rates forever by 30%. Do that before you get a new graphics card, because this means every graphics card you get with this monitor for the next 10 years performs better than it should.
Yeah, that's true.
This March, Jesse is focusing on playing tug of war, fetching sticks and balls all day and night, and just watching over the neighborhood. But me, I'm actually doing a decent amount of testing on equipment for new builds for members of my family. And one thing I won't have to watch for when it comes to these builds is where to get reasonably priced Windows keys. And that's because I use cdkeyoffer.com. This piece of content is sponsored by cdkeyoffer.com and their March sales event. Spring forward into avoiding paying monopolistic fees for Windows 10, Windows 11, and Microsoft Office products this March. Click on the links in the description to help this channel, by the way. Seriously, just clicking on those links helps Moore's Law is dead a lot. But what would help even more if you need a Microsoft Office key is to use offer code BROKENSILICON to save 25% off all Microsoft products, and then Die Shrink to save 3% off everything else on the website, because they do also sell Steam games, PlayStation keys, and even gaming gear as well. Use cdkeyoffer.com today.
All right. Let us then move on to story number 2. GPU pricing and stock update. I don't think price drops are over, people. So here's a little write-up I put together. I'll be brief. If you thought GPU prices were going to stop plummeting this spring, you're likely going to be proven wrong. On Friday night, Moore's Law is Dead tweeted a picture of bins full of RDNA 3 and Lovelace graphics cards, including 4090s, at a distribution point for a major retailer. This source insisted that this was far more than a month ago. It's not like this place just always has bins full of graphics cards on a floor, and it's not moving. And additionally, I can further confirm today that multiple contacts of ours at Best Buy, Micro Center, and other retailers across the world have sent similar pictures, but of back rooms at individual locations full of graphics cards, which I'm not going to show all of those. I don't want people to be able to match them up and figure out who the sources are. Overall, it seems like everything in the Lovelace lineup is starting to pile up at multiple retailers, and also tons of RTX 3060 through 3070 Ti Ampere cards are now piling up at some locations as well. And even the 7900 XTX is becoming fairly easy to get, although it is still usually selling out within days of coming in stock at most places, but there's usually one there now if you want it. Furthermore, it seems like AMD is planning for aggressive notebook pricing on some SKUs soon, so they're going to probably start pricing a lot of their upcoming stuff to move, even if Nvidia clearly isn't going to. And so I must warn people who are listening or watching this that no matter how hard Nvidia tries, it does not seem like gamers are giving up and accepting higher prices. And it would surprise me if prices didn't go at least a bit lower by the end of this summer. I just think it's going to keep happening, guys. And I will also add that on Newegg, in addition to, people I talked to, other retailers, I at least saw publicly on Newegg that there were multiple 7900 XTXs at MSRP. And for at least a day on, I think Friday, the XFX Merc 7900 XTX, that was one of those 3 times 8-pin models that hits 3.1 gigahertz and can match a 4090 roughly. It was below MSRP with the coupon. It was like 980. So that seems sold out now, but I don't know. Like, these prices keep going down. And I think any slowdown, whether it was because of Nvidia or not, was partially just because of the Chinese New Year, and now it's over, and now there's just a flood. And yeah, I don't know, Dan, what do you think?
Well, it just seems like you can't obviously say if this is the average person or not, like, because these are people like posting on forums, but there's definitely just been a really strong counter reaction to pricing this generation where, like, if you see people on Reddit and stuff, they're commonly saying things are where I think they're actually getting a little bit out of hand with like what they're saying, like, well, the 7900 XT would be good maybe at like $550 or something like that. And that, like, between $550 and $650 seems to be like a semi-common sentiment that people think the 7900 XT should be priced at. So yeah, it seems like they finally went too far with pricing, and people are a lot of people are reacting by going even stronger in the other direction rather than just being like, fine, I'll accept $800 for the 7900 XT. It's like, I don't know. I think the 7900 XT might only be seen as acceptable by a lot of people at like $700 or below at this point, you know? And
maybe not acceptable, but like exciting.
Yeah, that's probably a better way to put it. It's like, I should say, I don't know if I'll see it. I should expect to see that thing flying off of shelves unless it's at like $700.
Because these are really two different things. What I think is, okay, that kind of makes sense. And what people would actually pay for it. It's kind of like this idea of like, if Nvidia launched a graphics card this year that was 5 times stronger than the 4090, but it was 10 grand, no one would buy it. It doesn't matter. Like, I understand, like, its price performance is good, maybe, but no one's going to pay 10 grand for a card. I think a similar principle arrives at the 7900 XT, and to a greater extent, the 4070 Ti, where it's like, yeah, it doesn't matter. Like, I could have gotten performance, at least in this ballpark, for a while, and now we're in a recession. I'm just not going to get this unless it's a bargain. It's not the best.
Yeah, and I think a price for like the 7900 XT that's fair is probably like 750 to 800. 750 is on the low end, probably, and like a 4070 Ti would probably like 700, 650, probably 650.
It only has 12 gigs of RAM, and that really is an issue in a lot of games.
That's true, especially when we're comparing these cards. One has almost double the RAM, but
Yeah.
But yeah, I just don't know if people are going to be excited by those prices at this point because they're just annoyed at the market in general. Although, if the 7900 XT hits like $750 or $800, I think it should be selling pretty well.
Well, yeah, and sales are already picking up, I'm told, at 800, which it's at. It's at 800, and even AMD's own website is selling it for 850 last time I checked. So they're picking up. It's moving. It's not selling great, but it is picking up there. I can only assume that at 700, it'd be like, oh, okay, here's something 10 to 20% better than a 6950 XT with more RAM than a 6950 XT. Heck, even if I compare it to the 6800 XT, we're looking at something, what is that, 30 to 40% better than a 6800 XT with more RAM for about the price the 6800 XT was. All right,
Yeah.
700 will buy it. But that's really what it's got to be, because it's still like it's 50% better 2 years later, so it can't really cost more.
Yeah, it's just if it hits $800 regularly or all the way down to 700, I just think something like the 7900 XT is back in that range where, like, with a new generation of cards, the performance per price uplift you're getting is actually like where people want it to be, rather than where, especially in Nvidia's case, where it's been where you're getting almost no benefit to price performance versus last gen.
Which, on that note, I do just want to say this. I've seen a lot of people in the comments say things like, you know what, F this, I'm just going to get a 4070 Ti because I know if I don't pay $800 for that now, then the Blackwell one's going to be $1,200 and I'll be mad I didn't get it earlier. Your funeral. That is not what the data suggests. The data suggests prices are going to keep going down, that retailers have too much supply, and that, yeah, like, if you buckle and get this now, you're in the minority. Overwhelming majority of people aren't accepting these prices, and it's showing on Newegg already.
Yeah, the concept that if no one buys this generation of graphics cards, Nvidia is going to double down and increase prices again kind of seems counter to how any reality should work. Now, maybe you could argue Nvidia would be like, all right, I guess people don't want high-end graphics cards anymore, and they only release, like, I don't know, high mid-range graphics cards next generation or something like that. I don't think that's a realistic scenario, to be clear, but it's like, I think that's the worst counter reaction you could get. And honestly, if we have 2 generations where the max is like the 4090's power, whatever. I would rather see a 4090 for 3 generations as the ceiling to power to the amount of power we have, if that means price performance is rebalanced.
Right, you're saying, if Nvidia rage quits the chat because they wanted us to pay more, and if we don't, they only sell it to data center or something, which they kind of did actually a little bit with Kepler for a while there. The Titan was in data center for months and more months, and then they finally brought it to desktop when they thought they kind of needed more performance. Like you're saying, well, if AMD fails and people refuse to buy anything, Jensen may say, well, fine, we're only launching the mid-range and that's the 5090 or whatever, but whatever. Then if we go 2 generations where 4090 performance just becomes 1,000 and then 700, whatever, I'm still not buying anything until we get there.
Yeah, and it's just that sounds better to me than us 2xing the performance of the 4090 again, and everything goes up in price again.
Yeah, I agree. Especially because, on that argument of that thing I brought up of, like, doesn't matter if Nvidia launched something like 5 times better than a 4090 for 10 grand, like, the 4090 still crushes basically every game. So who cares? Like, what am I, it'd be like if the 4090 was 10 times better than it is now, but the 3050 was as strong as a 4090. I'd be like, I don't know, maybe just get a 3050. I don't know what you're even playing with that much performance. But yeah, the last thing I'd want to add to this is, I got to bring up that video I did, I don't remember how many weeks ago, about AMD has to go for market share. even if Nvidia is being stubborn, we're seeing AMD lower the 7900 XT's price already on their own website.
Mhm.
And we're seeing tons of cards continue to go down in price from the AMD side. And I'm hearing word that AMD is preparing some sort of aggressive pricing for laptops. Whether it's just last gen yet, I don't know, but it seems like they're going to price things to sell. It's because they bought this capacity and they can't just sell to data center like Nvidia can. AMD has to go for market share. So I don't know if Jensen's going to rage quit and be stubborn and whine that we won't pay more money. But AMD is going to take the message and go, if not being generous, they might go, okay, we'll lower prices a bit, and that's worth waiting for.
Definitely.
But I guess on that note, then let's move on to another graphics card launch that points to just how stubborn Nvidia is right now. With story number 3, Nvidia has at least considered $749.99 as the MSRP for the 4070 12 gigabyte. A couple of weeks ago, Moore's Law had leaked that our sources were notified by Nvidia's partners to expect an MSRP of $749.99 for the RTX 4070 when it launches in mid-April. Now, it should be noted that the price could be adjusted down from now, and I think it's somewhat likely this will happen. We've seen this happen before with multiple products from GeForce and Radeon in the past, including the 4090, 6600 XT, 5500 XT. I specifically remember the 6600 XT a year or two ago being told they're considering 400, but they might go lower. Everyone freaked out, and then AMD made it $380. So I want to be clear. There is a good chance this will go down from 750, but it's unlikely it's going to be lower than 650. It's almost never more than 10%. But also in that video, it was leaked that Nvidia is forcing above MSRP cards, so anything more than 750 or whatever they decide on, to get reviewed at a later date than the MSRP models, which points to Nvidia forcing a narrow pricing range. So the average 4070 is 10 to 20% cheaper than the average 4070 Ti. Like if the average 4070 was like $770, well, the average 4070 Ti is actually like $850 to $900. So yeah, it'd be 10% cheaper, actually, not just 3% or whatever. Also, there's going to be a Founders Edition like the one this channel leaked last year. And I've also seen a variant of that exact cooler with 4060 Ti on it. So they might use the same cooler for that. And also, there will be AIB models that use an 8-pin. I leaked that weeks ago. Igor now says the same thing at Igor's Labs. And so, yeah, overall, based on this info and the rumored specs, people should expect a 4070 to launch in about 2 weeks that basically offers 3080 12 gigabyte performance for about 3080 pricing. So whether that means 650, 700, 730, or 750, this is undoubtedly pricier than most people were hoping for. And yeah, that seems to depress a lot of fans, but also a lot of our sources. I want to point this out at the end here. A lot of my contacts, when this information came down the pipe, were depressed. They were hoping for $600 as the price so they could have any sought after volume seller this generation long term to make some money in a depressed market. But instead, it seems like Nvidia is hell bent on making this as hard as possible for their partners. Will they just, like rage quit during a recession and hope people get used to the pricing? And it's extra depressing for fans and for my partners, because that also means, or for my sources that are partners of Nvidia, because that also suggests that, I'm sorry, like if the 4070 Ti is, or if the 4070 non-Ti is even 650, or I don't know, I think the 4060 Ti is just likely to be between 450 and 550, and the 4060 is likely to be between 350 and 450. And I expect those cards to be 3070 Ti and 3060 Ti performance, relatively speaking. So I don't know. That means basically zero increase in price performance at 3060 Ti and 3070 tiers, with zero increase in VRAM. And that's just sad. And that points to NVIDIA's partners having almost no good option to sell in high volume to people this year if this actually comes true. All right. Talked a lot there. What are your thoughts, Dan?
I mean, that just seems like a really bold game, not going for at least decent price performance with the 4070. Considering the 4070 is typically the 70 is typically like one of their biggest volume cards, right? Or right? Yeah,
Yeah.
like that's their big volume seller.
It's basically the new 60 ever since they got people used to calling what should have been a 60 the 70 since
But like
Pascal. I mean, God, that was a 104 die that was cut down.
Like the 60 to 70 class of their cards has always been like their big volume sellers. And if it's not 700, I feel like they're just sacrificing this card for no reason. Because if this thing is just barely cheaper than a 4070 Ti, I don't ultimately see the point of it.
Like, why even launch it?
Yeah.
I mean, so this version can use a single 8-pin. It doesn't require a 16-pin, so it's cheaper for board partners. It also allows them to launch a founder's card that they can sell themselves and keep pricing at $750. And I don't know. I mean, you have to, that might just be the decision they make, and they don't care. It's like the 4080. The 4080 was priced terribly. This would be the same situation as the 4080, if not worse. And they shipped barely any 4080s. So I think it's just they want people to be used to it. Their flagship's over $1,500, the 80s over $1,200, and you should get used to around $1,000 to get a high-end card. I think that's just, and so that means that any lower you get than the 4070 Ti, which they consider the high end, I guess, even though I'd say that's mid-range, really. Well, it doesn't matter. Too bad. Like, we want you to get used to this pricing.
Yeah, I mean, that seems to be the goal. It's just, I just think it's failing this generation because nobody seems to be buying anything. And I guess you can say the 4070 Ti, it looks like it's still holding its MSRP relatively well, even selling above it still, but if you hold out a little longer for the 4070 Ti, there's no reason to really specifically seek the 4070 when that comes out, or the 4070 Ti when Ampere exists, or when RDNA 2 also exists.
When you can get a 6950 XT for $700, that is the same performance with more RAM.
Yeah, there's no reason to specifically seek out either of these cards. To just get a 6950 XT, get a 6800 for what are those now? Like
450 to 500, like the 6800 non-XT 16 gigabyte. Yeah, you can get them for under $500 a lot of the time. And let me think, like the 4070 Ti is stronger, but it actually has less RAM. And I mean, I don't know. I'd ask, what resolution are you gaming at? If it's below 1080p, that thing's going to crush it.
Well, yeah, obviously, if you're going for a 6800, you're going to be sacrificing some performance. But I don't know, if you're saving that much money, it might be worth it to some people. But yeah, all I'm saying is there's just no reason to seek out these cards because you could have already gotten this level of performance for 2 years now. The pricing is just a bit cheaper than it used to be. And the 70 cards are just what should be their high volume units aren't going to be high volume because they're insisting on trying to force the price up when people don't want it.
Mm-hmm. And I just want to be clear, if the 4070 12 gigabyte is $650 or more, which it seems almost 100% it's going to be, then I would say that the 4060 Ti, I would be floored if that thing is less than 450, and I would be floored if the 4068 gigabyte is less than less than 300. But really, if you think about it, the rumors right now, and considering the 70 uses a cut down 104 die, this is almost assuredly true. The rumors are right now that the 4060 Ti is just a pushed 106 die. So that's the 4070 laptop edition, basically. That's a 180 millimeter square die. I mean, if they're, and then that means 107 for the 4060 potentially, which that might be, that's I think a 150 millimeter square die. I forgot I leaked it. I think it's about 150. 150 millimeter squared, even at double the die cost, you're still looking at costs cheaper than a 3060 because there's 8 gigs of RAM instead of 12. So this thing, the only way that 4060 would be interesting with 8 gigabytes is at 300. Which if it was, I do think it would sell well.
Yeah, it would.
And I think the 4060 Ti would sell well if it's at 400. But any more than that, and 8 gigabytes it's low end, guys. So I would just hope no one is interested in this. Like, there's too many games now showing issues. It is a problem. Like, 4 gigabytes is the bottom of entry. 6 gigabytes is the bottom of low end. And there are games that like are having trouble even running 4K with 8 gigabytes. This is low end stuff. And if they actually try to do this, I just don't know how they think they'll get away with it. But it's worth remembering. The reason they might do all of this is they might say, we have an efficiency advantage. We're just going to send everything to data center and laptop, have small volume for desktop, and it's a recession anyway. So people are, why would we get in a price war during a recession? They might be doing this so that Blackwell comes out, doubles performance, and then they're like, oh, $1,200 for the 5080, but it's, 50% better than a 4090. Isn't that, I think that's what they're trying to get people used to, because they're still stuck with monolithic designs, and 3 nanometers can be crazy expensive. And I think they might realize they have to get people used to these prices for Blackwell.
Yeah, you might be right. It's depressing.
It's just an idea I want to throw out there is it's a recession. They may say if there was ever a time to be greedy and not care about sales, it's during a recession. And let's just see if we can get people used to this pricing for Blackwell, because AMD is going to have an advantage with chiplets, and we just need to make them willing to pay that much.
I mean, if it coincides with the recession correctly, I guess maybe 2 years from now, people will have more money in their pockets. They'll be like, screw it, I'll spend $1,200. But
yeah,
hopefully not.
All right.
Well, hopefully more people will have more money in their pockets 2 years from now. But
yeah, hopefully they don't. Yeah, hopefully they don't not have more money. They don't accept this.
Yes.
I don't know if I made that any clearer with that jumbled wording I just said. So let's just move on here to story number 4. So this is just the story for Nvidia's GTC announcement. Here's the write-up. Wow, GTC was boring for gamers. Honestly, the most interesting announcement on that day was probably that of the RTX 4000 ATA GPU. It is a card that will offer 20 gigabytes of GDDR6 over a 160-bit bus. It is based on the Lovelace 8104 die that is cut down to 6,144 CUDA cores, and it is low profile. This 20 gigabyte, 6,144 CUDA core die consumes 70 watts, and it's basically then a low profile 20 gigabyte RTX 3070 Ti, which I saw some people ask me, why are they launching this? And I have an answer, so I want to talk about that. Tons of professionals I've talked to over the past year have been pissed that Nvidia has basically abandoned the small form factor professional market. For years now, guys, there has always been some little no 6-pin required little low profile card that they can put into like little Lenovo workstations to upgrade. And with Ampere, Nvidia basically didn't offer them anything. A2000 existed on paper, but Nvidia seemingly shipped all of those to miners until about 6 months ago. And that was a low-end card. They weren't looking for that. So there's a lot of professionals with Turing era or older low-profile cards pulling their hair out right now, and this is Nvidia's answer. But anyways, besides that, low-profile card that would allow you to basically make a barely high-end micro gaming PC if you have the money for it. Nvidia talked about Grace doubling AMD and Intel server performance, so we'll have to see that actually tested. They are using AI to help TSMC with lithography. They have an AI foundation, and they have exclusive Adobe AI features coming to those with NVIDIA graphics cards. And they talked about Hopper. But I don't think any of that is really that interesting to gamers overall. All I would highlight outside of the RTX 4000 then is that to me, it seems like NVIDIA is legitimately making some interesting plays in AI to make money right now. I know people have always said they are an AI company for like the past 5 years, but from what I've seen, the truth is they failed to capture remotely as much self-driving market share as they were hoping to capture. But when I see them help TSMC with get hard designs for stuff and move forward with lithography faster, I go, oh, that's something that I can see people wanting if it works. And the same goes for like custom AI features in Adobe, just further cementing that creators use NVIDIA. So that was my big takeaways. I saw actual practical advantages NVIDIA was showing off for their AI stuff this year. And yeah, I don't know, Dan. You have any thoughts?
I mean, that feels like what's kind of been the thing with AI for almost its entire existence until really this year, is that it's interesting for research applications, but it doesn't seem to have broken out of that to any major degree up until relatively recently. Mm-hmm. Which, I mean, if they're using it for lithography now, well, that's that's a pretty big industry.
Yeah, don't show me like some kind of chat feature that looks wonky and doesn't work. Don't show me self-driving when everyone seems to just be making their own chips, or at least most of the market does, the biggest players do. Yeah, but like custom features in Adobe, like practical uses for TSMC that will make them buddy up to Nvidia maybe a bit more. Okay, this is all right. Nvidia actually, if I was a shareholder, I'd be like, okay, maybe it's time we can kind of start calling them an AI company, not just someone who wants to be an AI company.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I don't know. Did you have anything else to say about this?
No.
Okay. Well, let us then move on to story number 5. Raja Koduri pushed out of Intel's Arc lineup on life support. Here's the write-up. Last week, Raja Koduri left Intel, although in reality, he was fired, guys. That's right. This writer leaked an internal email showing that Intel had nothing to say about Raja leaving, basically, and was unceremoniously left his departure's notification at the bottom of a long email announcing other changes in management. Furthermore, I can confirm that the people I've talked to insist Raja was on borrowed time. He was almost assuredly looking for a new job for months. And yeah, for those who didn't see that part of the video from me, like usually someone who like got to like the head of an entire wing of Intel would have an email come out saying, with, you know, we are saddened to see Raja Koduri leave. He was an asset to this company. You know, he'll be replaced by this person. That didn't happen. And then like later in the week, they'd announce it again in addition to all of the other changes in management that week. That didn't happen. He was the bottom of multiple paragraphs and announcements. And they said with mixed emotions, him and someone else are leaving. Almost like one person they miss, the other they don't. And in fact, they haven't even named, to my knowledge, who's going to replace him. Almost like they don't need to replace Raja Koduri. Almost like Arc doesn't need a leader right now. And anyways, moving forward in that video, I also leaked some updates to Arc's roadmap. Currently, it seems like an Alchemist refresh may happen later this year. But even if Intel does call it Alchemist Plus, it's not the Plus that I know that they were considering launching a year ago. Like, it's going to be maybe new steppings with minor tweaks and higher clocks. It's not going to be a true plus, even though they might call it Alchemist Plus. And that's going to hinge on if they can get rid of Alchemist in large numbers and think there's any chance they could sell a 10 to 20% Alchemist for any profitable amount of money, which I find doubtful. Then there's also Battle Mage. It seems like it's likely just a single 12 gigabyte low-end die launching over a year from now on TSMC 4 nanometer. Remember, they'll be using 4 nanometer when Nvidia and AMD are launching 3 nanometer products. Although I will say there's a narrow chance for a high-end offering, but it doesn't sound good. And Celestial is now relegated to a single low-end die launching in the first half of 2026. When I say low-end, I mean around 180 millimeters squared. There's no progress being made on a high-end Celestial. I don't know what anyone else is getting their information from that says there is. There isn't. And the interesting thing, though, Druid still has 3 dies right now in development. And the cutoff for when you'd want to stop spending money on that is this year. So to me, it seems like Intel is still deciding if they want to entirely axe most of the progress they've made with dedicated graphics development. And I think they're waiting to have a better indication on if Battle Mage and Celestial are going to faceplant. They think they will later this year. They may cancel Druid. If they don't, it seems like it's going to be like one low-end die every 2 years until they reboot Arc, hopefully with a new name, because that name means nothing now with the Druid stuff they're working on. And so, yeah. In summary, I have one closer on this. 5 months ago, this channel leaked that the desktop Arc was effectively canceled for the foreseeable future. And 5 months later, Alchemist is a flop, AXG is dead, Raja's been fired, and it seems like at best we're going to get low-end offerings until 2027. You were warned 5 months ago. You will continue to be warned by this channel that you might be wasting money if you buy broken cards with a dubious future of support. You've been warned. All right. That was a lot. Sorry, Dan. Go on.
Oh, if this timeline doesn't seem super great to me, but I guess if they can get an actual full release with 3 dies of Druid out by 2027, maybe there's still time for maybe Intel can resurrect their graphics cards. Although I agree they probably should just completely rebrand after Celestial if really all we get is just 2 low to mid range dies out of those 4 years or out of those 2 generations, I should say. But I mean, if Druid comes out in 2027 and it doesn't appear that they've axed the 3 dies, I guess they're still somewhat invested in it, even if it's only somewhat in the distant future.
I really don't know what else to say. I mean, it seems like the best case scenario we're hoping for is they try to launch a lower high-end card over a year from now, but on a node that's behind Nvidia and AMD. And then basically they'll have nothing. Even if they launch a high-end Battle Mage in 2024, they'll have nothing high-end for at least 3 years. So yeah, I don't know. What I'm hoping for, and I think this is something some people don't get. I don't want Intel to go out of business, and I don't want the prospects of a third decent competitor in graphics to be completely lost. The people rooting for some unprofitable high-end die to keep coming out every year is how you get no Intel graphics cards forever, because they'll just run the company into the ground. It'll become, a hatchet job on every division where they remove everything they don't need. And the only way I see them avoiding that at this point is if they launch like a single, 150 watt card, 75 to 150 watt lineup based on a low end die every year, so they can get their drivers perfect when they have the money again in 4 years, which they might if Diamond Rapids and Granite Rapids turn out well, to actually go for a good launch. But the people rooting for like all of these high end things, I don't know. You just don't have sources. You don't see the writing on the wall. You're rooting for Intel to go out of business.
Yeah, and it's just the goal now needs to be keep their graphics cards on life support, like you said, until they can actually release a full-throated launch where they just need to completely rebrand their graphics cards and completely relaunch it. So, because I guess at this point, it doesn't really matter when the good lineup from them actually comes out. Because it doesn't really matter when the good lineup from them comes out, because you're just going to they need to do a complete rebranding of their graphics anyways.
Right. And I keep trying to make this clear to people. Like, the A770 uses a die slightly bigger than a 3070 Ti and has double the RAM. I mean, we know from EVGA's Rage Quit what these cards cost to make, in addition to leaks from Gamers Nexus and me. The 4070 or the 3070, I believe the 3070 was basically breaking even at like 350 to 400. So yeah, for most of its life, it sold for 600. They're making buco Dolores on the 3070. They didn't care. But now go from Samsung 8 nanometer, which I've actually got more information recently about this. Like, Nvidia got a deal on Samsung 8 nanometer, and now move to TSMC 6 nanometer, which costs more, double the RAM. There's no way the A770 profits below like 300 or something. And if that's true, which it is, I mean, I don't know if you guys get this. Their company's dying because of that. And if you ask them to launch a high-end 4 nanometer die next to high-end Blackwell 3 nanometer and RDNA 4, you're asking them to do something again that can't be profitable. But AMD and Nvidia are basically ignoring low end. I can totally believe if they get their drivers going, they do a way better job with a single die with Blackwell, Battle Mage, that they can get something out late next year that's like a 150 to 200 watt card that's $300. It's 12 gigabytes, less than 16 actually. Then, that AMD and Nvidia aren't bothering to compete with and actually can make a small profit and keep their driver team on life support. But everything else, you're just rooting for this company to go out of business.
Yeah, and for that to be their strategy, I do feel like their cards, I don't know, probably need to be like 250 or lower, though, because I guess we'll see how this generation shakes out. But I do feel like
true.
I do think there has to be some offerings that get to like $300. Maybe that's too optimistic, but
right. Well, it's plausible, with Navi 33 already a cut down mobile variant of it's performing like a 3060 or something, or better than a 3060. So, like, think about that. Like, that's a 200 millimeter, I think 204 millimeter square die that AMD has right now on 6 nanometer, same node as the A770, and it outperforms it. It's half the die size at higher performance. Mm-hmm. Like, again, you hit the true Intel haters are rooting for them to make decisions that make them go out of business. Unlike the products they might launch that we will now discuss in story number 6.
This podcast is brought to you by Bliss. Bliss makes your music library more browsable, searchable, playable, and beautiful, whichever music player you use. If you're somebody with a large music library and all of your files have different naming systems, they don't maybe have the album art correctly applied to half of them, and it's just hard to move them between different folders and find what you're looking for, especially if you're switching between one music app to another. Bliss can really help you out. So if you're interested in using something that does all of the hard work organizing your music collection for you, check out Bliss in the description today.
Raptor Lake refresh could keep competitiveness with Zen 4 this fall, according to the recently from Moore's Law is Dead. Recently, Moore's Law is Dead leaked some key details about Raptor Lake R, or Raptor Lake refresh, that point to it possibly being far more notable and exciting than I think a lot of people are expecting. Firstly, stating the obvious, Intel is currently planning a full Raptor Lake refresh in quarter 3 or 4 of this year. Second, Intel is briefing some partners already that they have a notable multi-threading performance increase coming to desktop this fall, and they don't seem to be indicating to their partners that it's Meteor Lake. Third, if Intel were to get DLVR working, which is something that was lasered off, confirmed by ASUS in Raptor Lake, it's plausible they could budget another 20% power to a hypothetical i9-14900K, and then that could be used for 10 to 20% higher sustained boost clocks. And so what does this all add up to? It's not confirmed yet. Expect more leaks out of this channel about it in the next month or two. But it is entirely believable to me now that through better binning, a more mature node, enabling DLVR, and probably telling people to get DDR5 8400 for the i9-14900K, that Intel could plausibly launch an i9 later this year that they'll brand as 14th gen that adds 1 to 5% in single threading and 10 to 20% performance in multi-threading over the 13900KS, while even possibly simultaneously slightly reducing power. That would also be important because that means they could launch a new Raptor Lake mobile generation that is, well, it's mobile, so efficiency is performance. They could just boost performance in mobile by 20% before Meteor Lake comes out against Phoenix and Strix. And I think this is a very important development because it should allow Intel to market a slightly to multi-threading over Zen 4 that's pretty firm now, not disputed, and argue that they're tying AMD in gaming. Although I still would hesitate to say they'll win gaming when all of the recent game releases, or almost all of them, like Flight Simulator that actually needs the performance or something, they're showing way bigger gains through AMD than just clock speeds. Most of Intel's wins with Raptor Lake are older or broken engines. So I would just point that I still think long-term Zen 4 X3D is going to prove to be way better at gaming. But just like we saw with the 5800 X3D versus a lot of Intel products from its time. But I don't know, Dan, what do you think about this?
It sounds honestly, like, well, I guess I don't know when Meteor Lake will come out, but it seems like Meteor Lake on desktop would kind of be a bust. And I don't know, this, at least for a suite of, for like a suite of CPUs coming out, this sounds like a better outcome than these, what was 6 big core Meteor Lake, probably. Where
Yeah.
that might be better at gaming, but will probably fall flat in everything else.
Yeah, I mean, it would be, yeah, well, in Meteor Lake, we'll have to see. It just matters what clock speeds they get to. But I've said for a while, it's going to be lower than Raptor Lake. And so I think unless they can get Meteor Lake to like 5.2 gigahertz, it's not going to notably increase gaming performance. And if it's not, what's the point in really launching that on desktop if they can bring out a Raptor Lake that's 20% better? I don't really see the point. It'll be way better for notebook, but you know.
Yeah, Meteor Lake sounds like Tiger Lake 2.0 kind of. So
It does.
They need you need to have an interim thing, especially with AMD seeming to really take the market in every segment with their non-X and X3D variants. Intel needs to do something more than, just launch a more power hungry, slightly faster clock i9 like what they have right now.
Would you agree that they should call it 14th gen, like not 13990KS?
If they can get this performance increase, I think it's fair to call it something else. Like, sure, I guess it's the same architecture, but I don't know, to the end user, that's functionally a kind of a different architecture. I mean, it's not a significant increase in performance, but if we're going back to the TikTok model that Intel used to have like 10 years ago, I don't know, that's definitely a talk in the TikTok.
Yeah. Yeah, and it would give them a chance to reevaluate their lineup, clear the channel, and start over where they need to. Like, I don't know where Zen 4 prices are going to go, but I everything I'm seeing is like, look, guys, and in fact, I was just sent this a couple days ago over the weekend, that, I mean, AMD's margins seem to be like, there's distributors telling me like AMD's margins are like 20-30% higher than Intel right now on desktop. AMD is just meanwhile, AMD is just getting rid of the yields that won't work in Genoa. So they're going to keep things priced where they need to be to sell. Probably not a cent less, but I don't think it's entirely ridiculous to think the 7950X could be $500, 900X, 400. So, everything, and then everything down the stack, just another 20% cheaper. And I think Intel needs this. They need something 20% better, and they need to be able to price it like, i9-600, i7 450, i5 350 or 300, because, and they need to try to more closely make one of their models like maybe an i7 14700KS or something right next to the 7800X 3D. They need that, I think.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so I guess that's, and again, most importantly, that might allow them to have a notebook generation 20% better, which for sure they need against Phoenix and Dragon Range. But I think that's about all we have to say about that. So let me then move on to a reader mail from Low Res Gamer, which will lead into story number 7. Low Res Gamer asks, what are your thoughts on the passing of Gordon Moore? And I want to go to you first, Dan, but first let me just read this write-up here from PC Gamer. Gordon Moore, who co-founded Intel with Robert Noyce in 1968, died on Friday at the age of 94. The death was reported by Moore's charitable foundation and Intel itself, which say that the scientist and former executive died peacefully while surrounded by his family at his home in Hawaii. Moore was Intel CEO from 79 until 87. He continued to chair Intel's board until 1997 and retired from the board altogether in 2006. And quoting here, Gordon Moore defined the technology industry through his insight and vision, said the current Intel CEO, Pat Gelsinger. He was instrumental in revealing the power of transistors and inspired technologists and entrepreneurs across the decades. Even those who aren't aware of Moore's history at Intel will likely know his name from Moore's Law, which refers to his famous 1965 prediction that the number of transistors in integrated circuits would grow exponentially, doubling every year for 10 years. And in 1975, 10 years later, Moore dropped that rate of his prediction to every 2 years. And although its relevance today is debatable, many argue it has roughly held true. About what Moore learned from his famous prediction, his foundation's obituary opened in recounts a joke he made in 2015. Moore in 2015 said, "Well, once I made a successful prediction, I avoided making another one." Moore is survived by his wife Betty, sons Kenneth and Stephen, and 4 grandchildren. So, yeah, I mean, this just dropped Friday after I was done working. I mean, what are your thoughts, Dan?
Well, I mean, obviously he's a person that casts a very long shadow, even if he hasn't really been in the industry for really the majority of my lifetime, honestly, because he was he was an emeritus board member since like 1997. But you know, this channel is indirectly named after him, and he's a huge titan in the industry. He founded Intel, which has been arguably the most relevant semiconductor the most relevant semiconductor company for 4+ decades. And I mean, I think his like whole Moore's Law thing is funny, that being the thing he's most well known for, because reading about it, it kind of seems like it was turned into a thing by people other than him, where it was like, I don't know, I think for 10 years, it's going to double every year. And then he said 10 years later, half it. And that for some reason became Moore's Law, when in reality it was like Moore's back of the napkin math, almost. Like, it's not really a law.
Based on what happened 20 years ago?
Yeah. It's more Moore's heuristic than Moore's Law, but sure.
Yeah. It's funny you say that, because I wrote down a similar thought. Like, it's funny for me, the guy was right, not about a law, but he, in this article, say an estimate or a prediction for a decade, and then he revised it. So that means it was not a law. Like, he himself said a decade later, never mind, it's this. And that's not the only thing he did. Like, he founded Intel and did all of this stuff. And, you know, Gordon was a brilliant man who made an absurdly huge impact on the semiconductor industry. And that's how I remember him. And that's why this channel is called Moore's Law is Dead, because, and I've made this spiel many times, I cannot believe how many people talk about that when there's so many other ways to increase performance. And the guy who made that heuristic, you said himself says is not true anymore. Decades ago, he said it wasn't true. And this industry is more than just trying to find through performance through node shrinks. And he was more than just that prediction. That was like really should have been a footnote, and it's all people obsessed about. But, you know, his impact on the industry will be felt conceivably forever, you know, and that's what he needs to be remembered as, the person who built Intel into what it is, which, whatever you think about Intel now, it was, you know, foundational for the American and Western technological and world technological industries. And, you know, that's what I remember him for, is founding modern semiconductors, not for a prediction he himself said wasn't true in the 70s.
Yeah. Well, rest in peace, Gordon Moore. You know?
Yeah. And, you know, he seems like, at least from what we're seeing right now, like he was a pretty nice, great guy as well. So it's unfortunate, but he lived a long life. So it seems like a story that ended well for him, you know, as well as it can end.
Yeah. I mean, I think we can all hope to make it to 94. So, well, depending on your outlook. But
yeah, there's a few ways I could dovetail that conversation. I think let's just leave it at that. Okay. All right, then that is all for the stories. Let us then move to the final wrap up. These are the stories that we don't believe deserve a full discussion, but are notable enough to talk about. This was going to be a major story, but there was enough news by the end of the 2-week cycle that I felt it should just be a footnote. Phoenix was delayed a month, so it's April now.
Well, that's not good. Not a huge delay, but
yeah. I don't have much to say about it. I'm not surprised. And it seems like AMD indicated that they just want to make sure they don't do a silly paper launch with unfinished drivers, that they want it to be a big full launch with the best drivers it can have. Hopefully this points to upgrades to RDNA 3's performance, but I actually won't comment on that until I get to a leak about that in the next couple of weeks, I think. This isn't in the wrap up, but I also want to point out I know that there's been someone circulating on Twitter talking about a Phoenix variant having 2 Zen 4 cores and 4 Zen 4C cores.
Oh yeah.
And there's been people asking me what I think about that, and I said, haven't I acknowledged that I misread the cache from meaning 4 big Zen 4 cores to meaning 2 Zen 4 cores and 4 Zen 4C cores in December? So I'm just acknowledging that again. Yeah, what I'm seeing is what I expect. I think 2 Zen 4 cores, 4 Zen 4C cores, and Little Phoenix, which we were the first to leak that there was a Little Phoenix at least. And that, yeah, I guess some stuff's emerging now that I was hoping to be the first to leak, though, which is that there's going to be upgrades to scheduling. I know you'll probably remember I talked to you about that a few days ago, but it doesn't seem like it's going to be some big thing needed. And if you guys listen to the Broken Silicon with Hardware Unboxed, I actually brought up to Steve, I don't really see why you need a big upgrade to the scheduler. Like, Zen 4C is Zen 4. It just has less cache.
Yeah.
And it clocks lower. So they already dynamically pick cores based on clock speed. So you'd already pick the best core based on clock speed. And if these are always clocked lower, I don't even know really what upgrades are needed. Although someone told me some upgrades to the scheduler are coming for it, but they're very minor. Were you going to say something?
I was going to say, leave it to AMD to somehow screw up the software end on a launch, but only to fix it a few months later.
Well, let's hope they avoid it this time, which I believe Little Phoenix is launching. I've heard later, like second half, maybe quarter 3 or 4 this year. So they have time, Dan, before you get the AMD fans all mad at us. But all right, let's move on to this here. There was a PS5 Pro rumor circulating that this person called exclusive, that a PS5 Pro is launching in late 2024. I actually went on Sacred Symbols recently to discuss this because Colin noted that his leak read like my leak from over a year ago from top to bottom. So I'm just acknowledging I leaked by end of 2024, PlayStation 5 Pro and the options, and there's no specifics in that leak that I saw as well. So, yep, still possibly true. I'm actually working on some console leaks right now, though. I guess I'll just say, it's a recession, and don't assume all of these companies want to go for expensive stuff just because they're thinking about doing it. But for sure, PlayStation 5 Slim this year, Switch 2 next year, Xbox refreshes seem to be coming. So let's just leave it at that for now before, I confirm something I haven't quadruple checked yet. Okay. Also, Dan, the 2 gigabyte RX 6300 was launched.
I guess that's my next card, right?
Yeah, I don't know. I guess I'm mentioning it because it exists. It is a 32-bit cut down 6500 XT to 8 to 10 compute units, which I believe that means vendors can decide to give it 8 or 10 compute units and call it a 6300. I have nothing to say about this card. This thing is, I think I decided in my 6500 XT / 3050 review that anything below a 1650, I hate, kind of. We're just too weak at this point unless you're talking about an APU where you just accept 720p. This is firmly in that territory of not interesting to me.
I'm more than anything, I'm just kind of surprised this actually exists at all. But
yeah, I guess I mentioned it earlier. Also, the 4060 / 4060 Ti cooler was leaked. It said 4060 Ti in the picture, and surprise, it looks exactly like the 4070 cooler I leaked. And I expect, that's what we're going to see them use for a few different designs. So there you go to the people that say I leak fake coolers. Same source as the Titan, everybody. And let's see. And this was something that popped up today, Dan. So Nvidia said cryptocurrency adds nothing useful to society. I just thought this was so ridiculous because like 2 years ago, they were talking about how blockchain would change our lives.
Well, yeah, they it's not useful to society because they can't sell pallets of their cards to miners anymore, Tom.
I know. And again, actually, as we're speaking, it seems like Bitcoin is starting a new bull run. I am not going to get into it. I don't think most people understand the actual point of Bitcoin, and it is not to put blockchain on every scammy looking website. And so when they, were talking about blockchain, I was annoyed, and now I'm annoyed. They're saying, well, it's not really that important when they used it to defend their actions a couple of years ago. But there you go. This is interesting. 12 and 24 gigabyte DDR5 sticks are launching.
Well, I guess that
because DDR5 allows for these capacities and previous gens do not.
I mean, I guess the paradigm is always that people have been doing is multiples of 16 or for a while, but
I forgot the exact name, but it's like a binary limit or something, whereas DDR5 does not have that. I kind of like this because I'm going to say, at least short term, I think 24 gigabytes of DDR5 is enough for games. You get that in a 16 gig card, that's probably perfect. I think most games are going to be built with 16 gigs in mind and benefits up to 64 gigabytes, but this is maybe enough to scrape by with it. I would just want it to be linearly cheaper. If you're doing a pure gaming build, I could get behind 24 gigabytes.
Yeah, I mean, it gives people more options to customize rather than right now you're pretty much stuck with either getting 16 or 32 gigs, or if you're building a new system, you should probably just be getting 32 gigs without that option available, because your other option would be 16 gigs with a third stick and single channel, which is not great.
Well, yeah, right. If you make 24 gigabytes that way. Yeah. And I think 48 gigabytes might be an interesting option because I think devs are going to build games to work decently on 16 gigabytes to maybe scrape by on 8 somehow if you're in like the lowest resolution stuttering, and really for 32 gigs. I think really devs are going to build their stuff. Sorry, my dog's under the table. Out of there. You don't want to have there be any chance she decides it'd be funny to roll over on top of the cables behind the PC and turn this off while we're talking.
That'd be pretty cool.
Go away, Jesse. But yeah, so, and she's now looking back at me confused, like, what did I do wrong? But yeah, so I think 48 gigabytes though would be interesting because I think most devs are going to build their games for 32 gigabytes, you're leaving room for inefficiencies. You know what I mean? And background tasks. So let me see here. I don't know if there's been updates on this since I added this to the list a couple of days ago, but it seems like in Resident Evil 4, AMD graphics cards seem to perform ridiculously well relative to Nvidia with the low levels of ray tracing it has. Like both RDNA 2 and RDNA 3.
Yeah, they definitely seem to.
RE4. If there's been like an update in the past day, but it's over the weekend, so probably not. I think that's just another example, kind of like a few other recent releases of, hey, if you don't push ray tracing all the way up and you actually don't program the game to nerf AMD performance, it's actually closer to Nvidia than you think. I am frustrated they don't show the 4090 on this chart, though. Yeah, I'm sure it wins, but it's annoying.
I mean, the 4090 is in the same class of performance as these, so it should be there. But
yeah. All right. And final thing in the wrap up, mobile Alder Lake motherboards. I don't know that I have anything to say about this, but I just thought it was interesting. Was it Eyring, ERYING, is launching motherboards with mobile Alder Lake processors with full just DDR5 DIMMs and PCIe slots for graphics cards. I don't know who this would be recommended to. It seems like it's just on AliExpress, but again, I don't know. That's interesting. Actually, is there an ITX version? There is. So it almost makes you wonder if this would make sense for an ITX build. I think it's interesting.
Yeah, I don't know. There's all these weird like companies that make these really weird niche products that only sell on Alibaba for some reason. But
Yeah, like like the laptop versions of a 3070, but a desktop card.
yeah, I bet some Chinese company just buys a bunch of them on wholesale and is like, well, we can make a kind of cheap desktop card, and that's the only way you can get this card.
Well, yeah, I've talked to a couple of them. Maybe one will send me one of these days for testing. But what I've gathered talking to them and also just Googling behind the scenes is, yeah, they're like a small startup of like 10 to 20 people usually that has their own tiny test lab, and they're just opportunistic. They're like, hey, I got a guy who can get us 1,000 laptop 3070 dies for a bargain price. And they get them, put them in a desktop card, validate it, and then they try to get into the market and make a small profit in a way that existing AIBs who are beholden to Nvidia to follow certain rules on what they launch, they aren't. And they're like, hey, look at this thing we just launched because we can. So that's what's going on with all of them. And I assume that's what's going on with this. But all right, let us now get to the final reader mails. I should writes in and he says, hi, Tom. What are the odds that some Dragon Range laptops would just have an LGA socket? Some laptops have used this in the past. I don't really see a downside beyond, of course, a slight addition of thickness to the laptop. 0, because then they're not Dragon Range. Might we see socketed AMD or Nvidia or Intel laptops from recent generations? Yeah, but that's not Dragon Range.
Mm-hmm.
That's a different binning, a different package to go to a different BGA socket. So there's just a difference. TMC Payton writes in and says, howdy. How will Intel avoid this disaster that was Kaby Lake X with their low core count Fishhawk Falls chips? The parallels in reduced memory channels, PCIe lanes, and a shared socket could cause problems when it comes to motherboards. Though I guess I'm more optimistic than before. Thanks. Dan, do you remember Kaby Lake X?
Honestly, I don't.
I mean, during the Skylake X, Cascade Lake X era, they just took Kaby Lake and put it on a different package so it fit in the big HEDT socket. But because it was Kaby Lake, it just had like 16 PCIe lanes for the graphics card. And if you put that in an HEDT motherboard that to my memory was like 28 or 32 PCIe lanes for the low-end models of X and up to, I think, 44 PCIe lanes for the top or something, you'd be dealing with a third the PCIe lanes and half the board wouldn't work, including USB ports. So how will they avoid this? Well, my understanding is there's like half the IO, not a third or a fourth. So easy. It'd be like, oh, half the SSDs run it ×2 instead of ×4 for NVMe. And if you populate this, that USB doesn't work. But it won't be like before where it's like literally half of the slots don't work now. So I don't see it as much of an issue.
That's kind of an insane compromise they made on Kaby. Like, I compromise sounds a bit generous characterizing, or it's just like, well, this just doesn't really work.
I don't really see why they did that either.
I don't either. That makes no sense to me.
If they had a way of giving you, like, back then, a quad core i7 with 8 threads, but then it had like double the PCIe lanes, okay, there's a niche for that. Or now, or like now, if they launched a version of Raptor Lake refresh to HEDT, but then it had the same amount of PCIe lanes. Oh, I could see tons of people going for that. But that's not what it is, and that's not what it was. So I don't know what the point of that is, really. And that's not what Sapphire Rapids, the low-end version of it, is. Like, I think what you're going to see is there will be some ITX and micro ATX boards that are still expensive, but don't really need the extra lanes to populate everything. And there will be some budget ATX boards like that as well. And then there will just be boards where they're like, hey, this is really meant for the top end one. If you put this in here, half of the NVMe slots run at half speed, but there's still 7 slots. And actually, I could see that still being interesting to some people because I believe, I leaked it first. I don't even remember, but I believe Sapphire Rapids is like 60 PCIe Gen 5 lanes or something. And if that's true, you still got room for still using ×2 NVMe. And there might be some people where they're like, yeah, I only need a couple of them to be the fastest speed, and the others can all be slower for more capacity. So I don't see it the same way as Kaby Lake X. The Eternal Dreamers writes in and says, I got into computer hardware because of needing more processing power for my audio work. What do you think are the next audio features to come to the tech space? More stuff like RTX voice that does noise removal, better special sound, special audio. Well, Dan, what do you think? And I know you don't do this, but I'm just kind of curious what you think comes next.
I honestly don't know that much about what audio technologies are and aren't coming out at any given time. Like, I know there was some hubbub about like ray traced audio a couple years ago, if I'm remembering correctly, but I don't know if that ever went anywhere.
The PS5 kind of does that with its audio. Like what is it? I forgot what it's called, but it has like a compute unit that's basically an audio ASIC or something.
Yeah, FPGA. With stuff like that sounds possibly interesting. I don't know, but other than that, I'm not really sure of other audio technologies, and that honestly seems like a partially like wouldn't this be cool rumor thing.
Yeah. Honestly, what I think needs to happen is a standard for 3D audio. AMD kind of tried this before with like the 290X, if you remember, Dan. I think it was called True Audio. And there were people saying, oh yeah, the 290X has an audio processor that crushes Nvidia, and then no one used it, and then they dropped it in upcoming generations. So whatever AMD would do, someone needs to either make a standard audio card that really is kind of like a ray tracing FPGA, but for audio, and then keep supporting it forever. Or AMD needs to add, and this might be plausible, as compute units are already 5 millimeters squared each or smaller. Like if we could get to a point where AMD could use 2 to 5 millimeters squared of the silicon for like an audio processor, and then never get rid of it and like make it standard, I think that'd be great. But they could only really, like Sony did that with the PS5, but they control everything and sell you headsets, so it's easy to make it get used. With AMD, I would want them, or Nvidia, there needs to be some streamline of like making sure everything, and I'll call it the audio supply chain of sound to your ears, isn't junk. There needs to be some sticker where it's like, this device can do it, this audio thing can output it, and this game supports it. And I don't feel like the audio standards we have now adequately do that, because it's still kind of a mess.
Yeah, because the audio oftentimes feels like it's auxiliary to like the monitor, and it's just a thing people don't pay as much attention to. So I'm not sure how, because really what you need to do is you need to figure out a way to successfully advertise like how this audio is giving you a better experience.
That's an issue.
Which it's easier to do that with visuals, I think.
Exactly. Like, how do you advertise how good this sounds? There's a thing a lot of people were worried about with the PS5, but it seems like they were able to do it to a point where it's just an extra feature that's doing well because it's part of the overall package. But it's something Sony struggled with. So yeah, I don't know. I think a dedicated accelerator for audio makes sense to me in an upcoming generation. More accelerators, they don't take up much space anymore. Like look how much scaling we're getting for like SRAM, like L3, L2 cache. It's like, I think between 5 and 3 nanometer, the difference is like 3% or 5%, I think. Like that's how much smaller cache gets, going from TSMC 5 nanometer to 3 nanometer, whereas the logic density gets 70% better. Like, if that's the case, then instead of adding more cache or extra compute units, why don't you just add one audio processor? I think that makes sense, but you gotta make sure it's a feature you make devs use, and that you have a sticker for audio, which I think I just thought of another way. Nvidia is going to add a sticker to their box. Now, the more I say this, and I'm going to go, AMD, you had True Audio first. You had the PS5's audio processor. Why did Nvidia beat you to this again? Don't let that happen, AMD. I hope it doesn't.
Yeah, because they need to figure out a way, because you can do that with resolution, frame rate, everything. You can easily quantify that. They need to figure out a way to quantify it to the nerds that like PCs.
Right. which AMD has less resources for their graphics than Nvidia. So I think it's hard for them to justify, whereas Nvidia can go, hey, an extra sticker the second they add FSR 3, we're talking about future ray traced audio. Bye, AMD. Like, that's why I think the more I talk about this, that's something Nvidia is going to do. Balto writes in, and he says, have you heard that there's some Xbox Series X/S games which can run off an external drive? What are your thoughts on this? Nothing. It's not surprising. Like, when I look at least the thumbnail for the video you're sending here from MVG, which I like MVG, these I'm seeing like Division 2 and Rogue Fighter, the Star Wars fighter game. Yeah, these are games that run on last gen. So any game you can run off of a USB is a game that's using an old engine.
Yeah, so presumably you should be able to play it on a hard drive. Although, that would require them to just remake the game files. It would be but it would be nice if like they were able to compress some of the game files on older generation games on the new consoles. But
yeah, and it does seem like I'm looking at this video. The games do have a drop in load times, or an increase, I should say, in load times for these. So it's like, I don't know. I would rather a streamlined system that accelerates loading by default, even when devs don't program for it, that no game takes longer than 5 to 10 seconds to load, even games that use an old engine. And I mean, it's nice for the people who have it, but I got to be honest, I've never had an issue installing enough games on like what the consoles offer by default, besides the Series S, obviously. I guess that's maybe a big deal for Series S owners.
Yeah, because the podcast, because the podcast, the Series S has what, like half a terabyte, correct?
Yeah.
Which
this version of it does. Wink.
Which, yeah, which that really isn't enough. I mean, that's not enough for a Call of Duty game, basically.
Yeah, so sure. I think this is actually good news for the Series S because it gives you options, and you know, I keep looking at these little thumb drives. I have one here somewhere that I just got, you know, as I continually like update the USB drive I used to move files around my PCs every year. And like this thing here is 400 megabytes a second. It's $30 and it's 256 gigabytes. So this is a lot cheaper than the stuff in Microsoft's trying to charge you for their, you know, DRM SSD. So for a Series S person, that's probably a big deal because you can spend like $30 and then throw a few more of your games every now and then to that.
Yeah.
But as we move forward, it's going to be less and less games because they're not supporting last gen and they can't run unless you use a modern SSD, hopefully, or that would suggest the console isn't using features it could be. You know, so it's cool, but let's use next gen storage and drop the old stuff, guys. Come on. Like that's what I'm most excited about.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's it, Dan. That's all of the stuff we had to discuss today. Any final thoughts or words?
No, I don't think so.
Yeah, the only thing I can think of is I should have a Zen 5 leak coming soon. Maybe it'll be before this podcast is even out or after, but that means I just decidedly didn't talk about those rumors in this at all. And yeah, thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to Moore's Law is Dead on YouTube. Ring the bell button. And I checked the statistics. It seems like over half of you aren't subscribed who are watching our content. So let's go. Let's get that. Let's double the subscribers, guys, right now. And then also make sure you subscribe to Broken Silicon, our podcast app of choice. Give us a review on Apple Podcasts or the podcast app you use. And consider supporting us on Patreon. We are working on upgrading more of that content to like video and coming out earlier and having more features. And it's all ad-free and it comes out early to patrons. So all that's there. It's the best way to support us is to support us on Patreon. There's tons of exclusive ad-free content that comes out or comes out early for the people that support us there. And otherwise, see everybody. Have a good week.
Goodbye.
This podcast was brought to you by the YouTube channel and website Moore's Law is Dead. Moore's Law is Dead and Broken Silicon are trademarks of their creator, Tom.
That guy is me, and I am indeed the creator, editor, writer, and showrunner of Moore's Law is Dead podcasts, videos, articles, and other media. However, it's not just me. Moore's Law is Dead is a team, with Broken Silicon co-hosted by my brother Dan, audio editing by Gerard Cortez, renders being done by the industrial designer Jean-Philippe Clermont, and special assistance is also provided by Carbon Cry and Kerry No Sugata as well. Find all of our information at www.mooreslawsdead.com on the About/Support page. In the event you do want to hire me for consulting work, hire Gerard for audio work, hire Jean-Philippe for industrial design work, or you're interested in working with Carbon Cry or Kerry No Sugata as well. You can also find our long-term sponsors on that page if you want to show them some love for putting food on our tables. Or you can also mail us some love. You can send letters or hardware donations to the following address: Moore's Law is Dead, P.O. Box 60632 in Nashville, Tennessee, zip code 37206. Although, to be honest, the best way to show Moore's Law is Dead some love is to support us on Patreon. Patrons are what makes Moore's Law is Dead content truly possible. Every month, and really every day, depending on who you're talking about, me, Gerard, Dan, and Jean-Philippe are working tirelessly to provide a steady stream of content that we could not keep doing unless we knew the work was possible without being reliant on sponsors dictating every little thing we put out. Don't get us wrong. We love our sponsors, but we love directly working for you, our fans, much more. If you have any extra money, even a couple free dollars a month, consider supporting us directly on Patreon. Those couple of monthly dollars will get you access to the exclusive podcast Die Shrink, voting on subjects of future podcast episodes, the ability to ask guests questions, and of course, access to the Moore's Law is Dead Discord full of like-minded people who I am sure would love to meet you. I am one of them. Additionally, higher tiers get access to early, ad-free episodes of Broken Silicon, the ability to ask questions in all Broken Silicon episodes and Loose Ends live streams ahead of the recording, and the entire back catalog of Moore's Law is Dead podcasts, in addition to having thanks in the credits of videos and podcasts depending on the tier, with other perks available as well. And hey, if you cannot afford to support us directly every month, please do share Moore's Law is Dead videos and podcasts with friends and family, and on social media and websites like Reddit, and give Broken Silicon a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or your preferred podcast app of choice. All of this does really help us so much. But like I said, this podcast would not be possible without the patrons directly providing predictable and reliable support every month. And so now it is time to give a personal thanks to the greatest of the fans. The following supporters are at the 10 gigahertz or higher supported levels: Brad Medlin, Drita Full, AV, Anthony Greffa, Greg Pataki, Muhammad Akwari, Brett Jones, Aaron Close, Little Journey, Jan Rauner, Daniel Hyde, Dreadbird, Brian Riggleman, Dr. Forbin, Sam Miller, Deke, Josh Law, The Mechanical Philosopher, Joe Foot, SNES Chalmers, Tom Bailey, Greg T. Wanchik, Andrew S., Frank Zielinski, Daniel D., MJB1, Eric Jackson, Christopher Croson, Joshua L. Herrera, Valko Malev, The Boss Haas, Nicholas Buckner, Spentham G. Spamton, Jonathan, Lord Starstream, General Jips, Blake, Franco Frederic, Matthew Lazier, Jensen Wang, Nathan Mose, Alex Vega, Gregory S. Ecker, Dominic Koch, Jake Dude 23, Jake Martin, Cameron, VentiCZ, Hard4Room.com, Original Ross, Slicky, Lance Bassler, David Cowden, Ricky Tan, Christopher A. Butler, GZ Ziggy, Sar Castro, Stephen Hart, David Sebastian, Meat and Pork Stew, Tim Robb, Luis Correa, Ian Clifford, Jesse Jaskowiak, Travis Gooding, Holden Mobley, Nanyan, Chris Rich, Deepest Learners, Matt, Sutsu Taylor, Stephen Coates, Michael McGee, Chuck Glidden, Semi Malas, Greg, AWS Danny, Patrick Groh, Amiable Chief, Brett Summers, Milton, Stephen Dick, Tommy, John, Brucha, Mark Mitchell, Mac Daffy, AC, James Anderson, Marshall Pierce, Mark Raidmaker, Dave Schultz, 3DS Boy 08, Albuma, Joseph A. Madrigal, Matthew Landavazo, Stefan, Cole Attic, Henry Zhang, Judson N., Keith Moore, The Grid, Michelle Pell, D313337 Antics, Joseph Kelly, Earth Taurus, Hexa Puma, Chrysantine, Jim Ferriera, RB Racer, Keith Moore, Michael Cozy, Ben, DNA Tech, Toka, John O'Shea, Royce Myers, Charles Russell, Reginald Ari, Slushbot, Tika Autumn, Jackson Miller, JSMMH, Neith Zink, Mean Dean, Richard Yao, Andre Jacques, Gaiman Since Reagan, Jeff Sedler, Jordan Simkovic, Loophole 35, Winstar, William Wilpy, James I. Rader, Corey Leonard, Nalima, John Shin, Justin Bustle, John Swin, Austin Haggerty, Roger Davies, Shay, Julian Leach, Corey Chappelle, Evan Dingle, C2, John Iverson, Michael Aaron, The Eternal Dreamers, Jansen Angima Himsagung, Derek Lambing, James Mosher, Kiko Sato, and of course, thank you to Sahara for the music.